All right, today we are diving deep into a pretty fascinating and, let's be honest, a very specific prophetic blueprint. It's this incredibly detailed timeline, all from one source, that claims it can actually predict several key dates for the end times. So let's get right into it. So, the big question this whole thing is built on is this: can we really know the exact year of the end times? I mean, that's the whole ballgame right there. According to the very specific logic of this timeline, the first significant date we really need to be thinking about is the year 2034. But hold on, that's not the end of the story. Not even close. The timeline then points to an even more important date, 2070. So, what's the logic? How in the world do you connect those 2 years? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down. Okay, so to get how this all works, we're going to follow the source's own roadmap. We'll start with how it gets those final dates, then we'll have to crack the key codes it uses for its measurements. After that, we'll see how it links scripture to actual history, use all that to calculate the start of the millennium, and then finally zoom out to see the entire timeline all the way to eternity. First things first, let's tackle that initial date. How does this system even land on the year 2034 as the end of a major era? The whole calculation, and I mean all of it, hinges on the year 1914. The argument this source makes is that the generation the Bible talks about, the one that would see the end times, is the one that was alive to witness the start of World War I. That event is the anchor for everything else. So how long is a generation anyway? You might think 20, maybe 30 years. But that's not how it works in this system. Nope. The source goes all the way back to Genesis, where God basically sets the human lifespan at 120 years. So for this system, the rule is simple. One biblical generation equals exactly 120 years. And here's where we put that first piece of the puzzle together. The math is actually pretty simple. You take that starting point, 1914, you add the length of that single biblical generation, that's 120 years, and boom, you land right at the year 2034. Okay, so that's how we get to 2034. But to understand 2070 and everything that comes after, we've got to learn the secret language of this timeline. You know, the special codes and symbolic units it uses to measure prophetic time. The first code you need to know is the prophetic day. Now, don't think 24 hours. This is based on that biblical phrase, time, times, and half a time, which gets interpreted here as 3.5 years. This little unit becomes a super important building block for the rest of the timeline. All right, now for what is probably the most unique rule in this entire system. It suggests that a cubit, which, is a unit of length, can also be used to measure time. And the justification for this comes from a verse where Jesus talks about adding a cubit to one's life. So this timeline takes that literally and sets up a direct conversion. 1 cubit equals 1 year. So we have these codes. How are they actually applied? Well, that brings us right here, to where the timeline connects scripture to history in a really direct way, basically turning 2,000 cubits of distance into 2,000 years of time. This right here, this is probably the most important symbolic leap in the entire theory. So look on the left, you've got a literal event from the Bible. The Israelites were told to stay 2,000 cubits away from the Ark of the Covenant. Simple enough. But now look at the right. This source applies its symbolic logic. The ark represents Jesus, and those 2,000 cubits of distance are transformed into 2,000 years of time, separating his death from the final trials of his people. So now that we have all the key pieces on the board, the dates, the codes, we can finally see how it all fits together. It's time to actually do the math and reveal the formula that gets us from 2034 all the way to 2070. Yeah, the road from 2034 to 2070 isn't just a straight line. The formula laid out by the source is actually a combination of a few different prophetic time periods. It kicks off at the end of that 120-year WWI generation, then it adds in a period of peace, accounts for the time it takes for the 7 trumpets of Revelation to sound, and then it makes one final adjustment for something it calls a year of grace. Okay, let's walk through the formula itself. Step 1, you start with our first date, 2034. Step 2, to that you add a 13-year period of peace for the church to be built. Step 3, next you tack on the time for the 7 trumpets. Using that prophetic day rule, that's 7 trumpets times 3.5 years each, which gives you 24.5 years. Finally, step 4, you subtract 1 year of grace, with the idea being there's no delay before the very last trumpet sounds. So what happens when you run the numbers? You land right around 2070, which this system says is the start of the millennium. But see, 2070 isn't the end, not at all. It's really just the beginning of the final chapter. So let's zoom out and look at the timeline to eternity and see what this whole framework predicts for the centuries and millennia to come. And wow, the scale here just explodes. The 1,000-year period of peace, the Millennium, is set to start around 2070. Exactly 1,000 years later, around 3070, Satan is released for one last conflict. This kicks off a 120-year rebellion of nations that finally ends around 3190. After that, there's one last 49-year Jubilee period, which is like a time of restoration. And finally, after all of that plays out, around the year 3240, the period this source just calls eternity begins. And what's really fascinating is the symmetry of how this all wraps up. The entire timeline is structured to finish around the year 7000 in the Hebrew calendar. The source connects this directly to the 7 days of creation, applying that biblical idea that, with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years. 7 days, 7,000 years. It all lines up. And we'll leave you with this final and pretty thought-provoking claim directly from the source material. It justifies all these calculations by saying this: Jesus only placed a restriction on knowing the day and the hour. That restriction does not extend to the year or the month. It's a bold final claim in what is, you have to admit, a remarkably detailed and intricate prophetic system.